Hey, how you doing? My name's David Swizaczeski. I'm the animation specialist for media entertainment at Autodesk, and we're here in the beautiful and always sunny city of Adelaide in South Australia to talk to the very talented people at Rising Sun Pictures. So you mightn't have heard of Rising Sun Pictures, but I guarantee you that you have seen their work. They've worked on over 120 films, too many to mention, but I'm going to rattle off a few. Harry Potter, Logan, Gravity, The Wolverine, Terminator Salvation, The Hunger Games, X-Men Origin, X-Men Days of Future Past, and X-Men Apocalypse, and Thor Ragnarok. And that's what brings us here today, is we're going to do a deeper dive into one of the iconic sequences in Thor Ragnarok. So we're going to be looking into the Val flashback sequence. So the Valkyries attacking the big bad guy. We're going to look in and meet some of the artists that were involved in that scene, have a look at what it takes to put a scene like that together, the work that's involved, and break it apart so you get a better understanding of what's involved to do that. So come join me. We're going to meet some of these very talented and amazing people, and hopefully we're going to have some fun along the way.
Everybody ready? Hoorah!
What? What? What?
Hey guys, welcome. I'm here with Noah Weiss, who is the CG supervisor at Rising Sun Pictures. Noah, explain to me, as a CG supervisor, what that role is.
Yes, my role as a CG supervisor in a show is to oversee all of the computer graphics that takes place on a film. So I get involved at the start, establishing the processes that we're going to use across the show, and then my job is to make sure that those processes work through the building seamlessly.
As far as the visual effects go, it was very new. There was some groundbreaking stuff that happened in this. Can you give us a bit of a breakdown of that?
Yeah, so this sequence is pretty unique. It was slow motion in nature, very slow motion. And it was using a new style of light rig called a satellite light rig, which hasn't been used a lot in the film industry. And it's an array of strobes that fire in sequence, so you get this really interesting frozen moment quality about the action. So that was really challenging for us. We actually had to go into Maya and create a rig that mimicked that satellite light rig, pre-visualize the whole sequence so that they could take that on set and actually use that to govern how they shot the sequence itself.
So when you talk about this, I kind of have these flashbacks of that old Matrix sort of sequence. Is it something like that? How does it differ from that?
Well, the Matrix sequence is an array of cameras that takes individual frames, and that's used to freeze the action. This is a bit different in that the light will actually animate around because the strobes are firing in sequence. So you get a really interesting sweeping light quality both on your subjects in the center of the scene and then also the environment around.
Can you give us a breakdown of how you start with that and how you work your way through to a final render?
Yeah, so we typically start in the previs planning stage with our layout department. In Maya, they'll go through and construct rudimentary geometry that just kind of blocks out a sequence. And then they'll also design the camera moves and try to establish, a sequence that will fit together and make sure that the cuts flow, those kind of things.
And are those, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, are those camera moves that you do in Maya, are they then somehow put into some sort of physical camera rig?
Yeah, so we actually use on-set measurements to create the rig in Maya, and we test the camera in the Maya, and then those pre-visualization files are then taken on set, and they use those to actually construct the setups.
Right.
Yeah.
You've got the riders that are sitting on the horses. I assume some of those riders are live action characters, some of them are digital characters, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. They're quite close to camera main hero characters. We tried to keep as much played as possible, but for all of the other riders taking place in the piece, we've animated and then simulated each and every individual. To get around the challenge of having so many riders and horses in the army, we actually took to using a proprietary alembic procedural that we designed.
Okay.
And then we baked out cycles of animation for both the horses and the riders, and then used those to place and design the groupings of the armies.
Oh, right.
And then once we were happy with the performance of the groupings based on these cycles, we would then go in and painstakingly hand animate on top of that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so each and every individual rider and horse has had a tune-up in terms of its performance.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, we're very focused on the detail with these kind of sequences, and there's not really anywhere to hide when the footage is this slow.
Yeah.
The audience gets a really good look at what's going on. Yeah.
Absolutely. So how long in film time does a sequence go for? It's almost a minute?
Yeah, that's right.
About a
yeah.
minute
Yeah, it's
long?
about a minute.
So about a minute, but how long how much of your life did it take to make that sequence?
All up, I think from our previews on set to final completion was about 18 months of work.
Can you talk a little bit about Shotgun and how that fits in your pipeline?
Shotgun's pretty much the backbone of our operation. We've been involved with the software since the beginning. We were one of the first companies to start using the product, and it's quite integral in all of our asset management, asset handover, shot management, briefs. From start to finish, the artist is focused on Shotgun most of the day. We manage all of the tasks for each individual artist and the scheduling through Shotgun as well. So it's pretty easy for an artist to sit down with the way that we've configured it to look of a day what they have to work on in terms of either assets or shots, and be able to execute the work in parallel. Each of our assets or shots are checked in with a setup file. So an artist can right click and open a setup file if they want to pick up a shot from that step. But so if they're working in Nuke, they can open a Nuke script. If they're working in Maya, it'll open a Maya scene for a turntable.
Right.
And then we also use that to notify of handovers within the pipeline. So if there are other assets that have been put on disk, there'll be a notification message that comes up.
And so that's how the artist would work with it. How does the director and supervisor like yourself work with it?
Notes can be placed on basically anything that's put into Shotgun, so whether it's a piece of concept art or a full-blown shot. It's quite easy to view it and type the notes in, and they'll be recorded in a log. It's also easier for us to filter types of notes, so we can filter notes by department, by artist. If we want to see the progress on a shot, I can also go in and look at an entire sequence and see how certain shots are travelling. That kind of thing. So it gives us both, the granularity, but then also a broader overview as well. Quite often, being a visual language and being in film, it's a lot easier and better to draw something than it is to try to describe it in words. Correct. So we quite often will make annotations. Those annotations are saved against a written note, which actually specifies on this frame, I would like this. And then we keep those frames in situ, and in Shotgun it records which frame has been pulled out of the original source movie.
Right. I think the other thing that is quite useful with Shotgun, I'm curious to see how useful it is for you, is dependencies, working out what's dependent. So for instance, you model a character, at some point you've got to rig it, at some point you've got to animate it. How useful do you find having that waterfalling sort of dependency?
Yeah, very useful. We have a structure where all of our departments are running in parallel, so we don't start in layout and layout wait for animation and animation, hand over to light. We start each department running at the same time. So the communication between departments and the notifications needs to be spot on for things to concatenate.
At some point, you've got to render them so we can actually see the final stuff. can you start to explain to us the rendering process that you go through?
Yeah, so various departments at effects and then also the animation departments, they export caches through an Alembic procedural that we have that I mentioned before. And then that procedural, we pass those to Arnold where we render most of our work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And how have you found Arnold?
Oh, it's great. It's very easy to use. Ray tracing in the past with other products, you really had to know every single bell and whistle in it to make it really work. Whereas the coupling of parameters in Arnold is really powerful, and it allows you to get to, you know, the 75–80% quality line really, really quickly. So whereas, you know, traditionally other ray tracers, that would be a real struggle. And then it's also, particularly in the last release, there's been a lot of noise reduction, which is really helping a lot. And it's a lot easier to tune images now than it used to be. And I think, you know, a lot of other ray tracers really struggle with the noise reduction and that kind of stuff, and it's really excelled in that area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Getting up to that 80% quality level quickly really does save you a lot of artist time, which you know definitely equates to money.
Right. So, are you at all using Viewport 2.0?
Early in the production process, we create Viewport 2 shaders that we use for our previews.
Yeah, right.
And we carry those through right until we're on set. And you know, this really helps with the presentation to, you know, making things presentable enough to go in front of a client, for example. It doesn't have to go all the way through lighting anymore, which means that there's a huge cost saving, you know, if you've got something that you can turn around quickly that looks good and that won't open up the floor to a bunch of questions about the shading and that kind of stuff early in the process. Yeah.
Right. No, thank you so much for your time, mate. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. My pleasure.
What?
Hey guys, I'm here with Tim McIntosh, who's head of Creatures. Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
So Tim, can you explain to me what your job entails?
Yeah, so as head of Creatures, I oversee all the puppet rigging, the sculpting pipeline, hair simulation and cloth simulation. So anything that animation moves around, you know, the puppetry and the rigging, we deliver the rigs to them with the controls to move around. So I oversee that, and also the post-shot work, which is post-animation moving around, simulation of cloth and hair and muscular movement and yeah, fine-tuning all the deformation.
Okay. Oh, cool. So when you say puppets, we're not talking Muppet puppets. We're talking.
No.
What are we talking about when you say puppets?
It is kind of like Muppet puppets.
Okay.
But an animation team will request certain controls to move a character around the screen, and those controls and the inner workings of what we call the rig are what we piece together. It's quite a technical area. You need to know a lot of coding skills, you know, mechanics, how anatomy works internally in order to give animation the necessary tools in order to make that asset look real on screen.
Yeah, right. So we're doing a deeper dive on the Valkyrie, the Val flashback sequence.
Yep.
Can you explain the work that you had to do with that?
Yeah, so there was a bit of everything in that scene. There was the hell scene, and there was horses, there was Valkyrie, there was weapons being flung off in all sorts of directions by Valkyrie, and then there was a lot of effects. So there was also cloth simulation and hair simulation, so all the facets of the creature pipeline were used in that shot. There was also crowds, which we had a lot to do with. It starts by receiving an asset So we're talking about the horse. We receive an asset from the modelling department, and we'll have a look at what needs to go into that in order to create the action that that asset needs to do on screen. So for something like the horse, we'll go and design a puppet and place it in the geometry, start, manipulating it, figuring out, what's working, what's not, what we have to, do as a muscular pass, which is, more of a creature pipeline thing post animation. So anyway, we'll get a rig into the horse and we'll deliver it to animation. Usually they'll give us some feedback and tell us they don't like it, or there's parts that they do like. And,
Sure.
that will then go off into animation or layout or tracking for placement on screen and animation and performance. And that's usually the bare bones, low-res geometry.
So it sounds like at this stage there's a lot of backwards and forwards that's happening with your department.
There's a lot of backwards and forwards.
How do you track those assets to make sure that you're working with the latest versions?
So we use Shotgun. We really integrate with Shotgun for that reason. We've also got some proprietary tools that help us talk to Shotgun in convenient ways. But we have levels of, we have statuses which define levels of release. Or publish, so if we want to pass an asset downstream, we can set a tag on it or a flag on it that says, okay, this department is able to pick it up and we're happy with it.
If I was the next person down the line, that's sort of the process of passing it through to me. So once I get that, it never goes back? Or?
No, it definitely comes back. Throughout the sequence or the process of the sequence, director or the VFX suit might have requests for extra things, it's not quite matching on screen, or if it's digi-double replacement, there's definitely a lot of backwards and forwards. Many things can happen, as the animator starts moving bits and pieces around, things don't work so well, or just volume retention might not be.
Can you explain that? What is volume? When you say volume retention, what volume retention? What is that exactly?
Yeah, so I mean, if you imagine that we've got flesh and muscle and fat and everything under our skin, when we move, there's all of that internal stuff holding our skin out. It's a volume. With rigging, you're kind of faking all of that sort of stuff.
Sure.
You're putting just a skeleton in something that an animator moves around. We go through this process that we call binding, skin binding, which binds a polygon geometry to an underlying skeleton. And on top of that, the animator can move that skeleton around with the controls. So we, as a rigging team, it's our job to make the rig as lifelike as possible, holding all that volume retention and goodness you would see in real life. Post them animating, we get what we call a skeleton back, and that can drive muscle rigs, and that's where the creature pipeline kicks in. So you've got the animation pipeline, and that sort of talks to the creature pipeline. The creature pipeline is like a post animation step, which allows you to do all of that good stuff that really adds that next level of detail and beauty on top of what animation does. So animation's performance basically, and then creature is the finesse. Right,
gotcha. And part of that creature stuff, and I guess finessing, would be cloth and hair.
So obviously, animation never wants to deal with that. So we deal with that all post animation. So that requires animation outputting what we call caches, the geometry caches. They're point clouds, defining where the geometry is at any given frame or point of time. That comes back through the creature pipeline, and we use that to drive all of our simulations. So cloth colliding with arms and legs, and wind, occluding wind and all that sort of stuff. And Valkyrie in the Hell sequence was wearing a cape that was really quite artistically driven. At any given time, the VFX suit would want it in some place at some time. So we would use that animation performance to drive that. But the creature pipeline allows us to do a lot more, like inserting muscles. So any deformation that wasn't good that came out of animation, we'll fix that up in the creature pipeline, bulge it out a bit, make it a little bit more. I mean, for Hella, she was strong and curvy, so we needed to push that back in. And because it was a full digi-double replacement of Kate Blanchett, it was, there was quite a bit of finessing most of the animation stage. So,
Just want to go back to the cloth. How do you direct cloth? Like, how do you artistically direct cloth movement? Like, what sort of software are you using to do that?
So we're using Maya, Autodesk Maya, for using their N-cloth solver, which is brilliant. I think it's still and always has been the best out of any solvers. It's fast, it's reliable, and there's so many settings that you can just fine tune it.
Okay.
But yeah, we use that for all of our. We use Nucleus for all of our simulation.
Oh, so for hair as well?
For hair as well.
Really? Okay.
With a third-party plugin, Yeti, that drives the actual procedural at render time. So yeah, all the dynamics come from Nucleus, and yeah, it's really well integrated into our pipeline.
Yeah.
Nature of simulation and dynamics, it's always a little bit.
Yeah.
It's very. You have to have an artist really overseeing it. You can't, it never just works by itself.
Right.
But there's a lot of fine tuning and things like air density, wind speed, materials and weight, and how the air will be the friction of the air against the surface of the cloth. All needs to be tuned by the artist, and that takes quite a bit of time and knowledge of how fabrics and materials are put together.
The horses play a very big part in the sequence. I don't suspect they were real horses.
Well, there's some live footage in there. So some of the main horses, really close to screen, because it was slow motion, we got away with small snippets of live action, and they were comped in the foreground. But everything past, that first horse was all CG.
Right.
So even the digi-doubles riding the horses were CG, so they all had CG hair, CG cloth, CG suits, and that was all done with cloth solvers, a little bit of manual deformation, so sculpting, which we've introduced into our pipeline just recently, a really robust sculpting using Maya tools.
In that bit, we see the wings on the horse.
Yes.
How did you put that together?
So they were all that was CG too.
Yeah.
There was one horse that we had to integrate CG wings onto the actual live action horse, just because we had to maintain the rider and the way that it all sort of fit in screen space. It actually worked out easier and more. It looked better to have the CG wings integrated with the live action. Typically, we'd just do full CG horse for all the background, horses. But there was that occasion where we had to actually integrate them. So with the feathers on the wings of the horse, that was Nucleus driven. So all the simulation and collision detection and all of that sort of stuff was done with simulation. And then we used the procedural from the third-party Yeti grooming tool to make all the feathers. Okay. So essentially we have these splines that come off the feathers, the wings of the horse, and then at render time feathers are generated, so you get the look of real feathers.
I'm curious, how long does it take to rig one of these horses and get it ready for animation?
It takes the whole show. Or as long as that sequence is running for.
Right. So you're saying it never actually finishes? You're always fine-tuning
until that shot's out the door and everyone's happy with it,
That's interesting, because I always assumed that the rigging process was a very finite sort of cut-off process.
I like to think of it like that too, but unfortunately there's time constraints. People need to see things before other departments are finished. So things like animation, it would be nice to hand over a final rig and be done with it. And, but unfortunately, maybe the head needs to be presented, or we need to match to the plate for layout. So sometimes we create proxy rigs, which are cut down versions, quickly put together, and we'll hand those off to the layout or crowd department to place in screen. And then we'll keep refining the underlying rig, which then goes to animation and for the fine tuning. But while the shot and the sequence is actually running, there might be scenarios where there's things that we haven't thought about, like the breathing of a horse is not extreme enough, or we want to see some more chest movement, or the neck doesn't curve in the way that in screen space that we initially thought it would. So it will come back to us and we'll refine and refine. Sometimes we lay out different versions and lock them down depending on where the status is of that shot. But generally, until that shot goes out the door and everyone's happy with it, it keeps coming back.
Wow. So how do you make sure that work isn't lost when you're doing that?
It's a juggling act, really. The key with rigging is that it's never destructive. So when you put out your first rig, you've really got to be happy with that as a foundation. From there, it's really about always making it better. We render out of Maya using Arnold, which then goes into Shotgun. We actually use Shotgun as our way of visualizing a result, not just passing down to other departments. We put all of our work into Shotgun.
Okay.
So even if it's a horse with a head that's come off and the simulation's exploded and just hasn't worked, it will still go into Shotgun, and that's our way of saying or seeing that whether something was successful or not.
Oh, okay.
But our main reason for using Shotgun is one, approving work. So if we have 5 assets in one render, we can actually approve all of those 5 assets and all the components that went into them by approving the status of that version in Shotgun. I mean, other departments really know what to pick up by retrieving information from Shotgun.
Right.
We can also put notes in there, explaining what's changed on a shot, what's changed on an asset, what's changed on a simulation, and everyone can see that. Anyone that's involved can see that. So we can tag people and other departments and everything.
Yeah. So if someone gets tagged, then they get a notification, or is it just company-wide?
Yeah, they get an email notification, and usually the coordinators feed back the information again, so they all get tagged as well, they all get emailed, and it's somewhere that you can go back to and reference notes.
Right.
So you might be working on one shot for 3 weeks and have to go back to another shot, and Shotgun retains that information.
Gotcha.
And is really useful to be able to go back and say, okay, well, that's what I needed to do.
Wow, that's fantastic. I imagine, I can just, from what you've been saying, I can see how important that is. Cause
it's really important,
yeah, the backwards and forwards and the long development time that you need.
A lot of development time, and artists are always working on multiple things. So having somewhere that you can not just retain information but visualise that information, it's priceless. You can't. We couldn't do our job as well as we do without it.
Sure. And how do you find RV as a viewer?
RV's awesome. I don't know what we used to do without it. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's our default viewer, so been using it for years at many different companies, so it seems it is the industry standard, and again, I'd hate to see it go away.
Yeah, likewise.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's well integrated with Shotgun too, so a right click will give you some footage in RV at the right resolution.
Yeah, sure. Well, Tim, look, I could sit here and talk to you all day, but I should probably let you get back to work.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you.
Thanks, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
See ya. That was just incredible. I am completely blown away and almost speechless. I've still got a few words left. So with those words, I want to say a very quick thank you to the people at Rising Sun Pictures for being so generous with their time, showing us around the studio today, showing us the work that they're doing, and letting us get a real insight into how a scene like that Valkyrie scene is put together. You have to admit, there's so much work and so many talented artists who spend so many hours building a sequence like that. It's quite incredible to see how it's put together. I also want to say a quick thank you to the Academy of Interactive Entertainment, AIE for short, for helping put this video together. A lot of their students are here right now working on the next films that we weren't able to show you, but we definitely had worked on the Thor film that we saw and other films in the past. So, that's me. I am spent, I am done, I am happy, exhausted. This has been amazing. I want to go make a film. Who wants to join me? David out.